Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC Fight Night Nashville, Cory Sandhagen versus Rob Font. We saw some terrible performances, and we're going to discuss who needs to be cut from the UFC roster after their performance at UFC Nashville. I'm going to start with some honorable mentions, and then I'm going to get into my actual list of who needs to be cut, ending with who I believe most needs to be cut from the UFC after their performance at UFC Nashville. And then also at the end of the video, I'm going to discuss a top 5 ranked fighter on this card that is getting a lot of criticism from UFC fans following their performance at UFC Nashville, but they don't necessarily deserve to be on the list. Starting off with my first honorable mention, and that is Jake Hadley. Jake Hadley lost to Cody Durden at UFC Nashville, lost via decision. And in the first round, he was getting lit up with right hands and elbows were landing and cut open his eyebrow. And in the second round, Jake Hadley had a great scramble and it looked like he might get an armbar or a triangle choke, and he landed some damage. And I thought Jake Hadley clearly won the second round. I thought Cody Durden clearly won the first round. The judges didn't see it that way because they gave it 30-27 for Cody Durden, all 3 judges, I believe. But I thought it was 1-1 going into that third round. I feel like most people agree with me on that. And then in the third round, Jake Hadley would just shoot in on takedowns, sloppy takedowns from distance, and then basically just look like a zombie walking dead with his arms outstretched, not even attempting to really wrestle. You know, he would kind of get sprawled, and he wouldn't attempt to chain wrestle or push him against the fence or do anything. He would just lay there on his knees in between another grown man's legs because he had no cardio. He had no gas tank. And he came out afterwards and already started making excuses about his weight cut. And if you go back to his Dana White's Contender Series fight, he missed weight for that fight and still got a contract. Then he got into the UFC anyway because I think the UFC was showing a little bit of bias towards a UK fighter. They like to build up the UK market. And he loses his UFC debut to Alan Nascimento. Then he reels off 2 wins. One of those guys is now retired. And now he loses to Cody Durden, where Cody Durden, don't get me wrong, he's not like bottom of the barrel, but he's not elite of the elite. He's not top 15 by any means. And we need some fresh meat in the flyweight division, don't get me wrong. But if you have no gas tank, and on top of that, your gas tank and your loss and your horrible performance is blamed on your weight cut, you need to go to a different weight class. You need to go to bantamweight. And I don't know if Jake Hadley can even be successful at bantamweight. Flyweight's a good division, but bantamweight is absolutely stacked. It is stacked. So if he can't get these weight cut issues, I know technically he made weight for UFC Nashville, but if he can't get these weight cut issues intact, I think it's time for him to be cut from the organization. I feel like in his next fight, he's bound to miss weight. He said he saw God while he was cutting weight for this fight. And I just also don't like, he should have just kept that to himself. You lost to Cody Durden. Cody Durden flipped you off and told you to suck it afterwards. And then afterwards, you're like, oh yeah, I had a bad weight cut. That's why I lost. No, you got outstruck, you got outgrappled, and that's why you lost. And you had no gas tank. You got outgrinded by Cody Durden. So stop making excuses. Don't miss weight, don't have bad weight cuts, or move up a division. That's what I have to say. Move up a division. He's an honorable mention because of that. He's only on a 1-fight losing streak. He won his last 2 fights before this against Malcolm Gordon and Carlos Candelario, who just retired. But if he can't get the weight cut under management and properly do it, he needs to be cut from the organization. If he loses his next fight or misses weight in his next fight, he needs to be forced to move up a division. Moving on to my next honorable mention and my last honorable mention, and that is Rob Font, who was number 7 ranked in the bantamweight division. He's lost 3 out of his last 4, but he hasn't lost to terrible competition. He's losing to the elite of the elite. He lost to Cory Sandhagen at UFC Nashville, just got out-grappled the entire fight. We'll talk about that fight in a second. He beat Adrian Yanez, who was kind of making his way up the ranks as a young prospect. Before that, he lost to Marlon Vera, where he was getting hurt every single round, even got a Sweet Chin Music in this fight. And then before that, lost to Jose Aldo. So these aren't horrible losses, and he did get the win against Yanez back in April. But he's 36 years old. He's in a shark-infested bantamweight division. It is so stacked. And I feel like maybe he can go over to Bellator and have some success over in Bellator, Because right now, Rob Font, after this performance, he's basically going to be a stepping stone for all the young up-and-coming prospects. Cory Sandhagen isn't even known for his grappling, and he came into this fight with an injured elbow. And Rob Font, after the first round where he attempted some sweeps and attempted some submissions, Cory Sandhagen just laid on him the entire fight and really didn't do all that much. And Rob Font had nothing to offer. And then every round starts on the feet, and Rob Font wouldn't even throw anything, wouldn't look to land anything. And his coach was screaming at him, do something. And he just wasn't doing anything. He was frozen on the feet. So the way I see it, Rob Font can't beat elite strikers. and he can't beat elite grapplers. And Cory Sandhagen, again, isn't even known for his grappling. And, I know Rob Font still has some fun fights ahead of him in the division potentially, but he's getting up there in age. We're going to start to see a Tony Ferguson type slide for Rob Font. I know Rob Font never got to the high points that Tony Ferguson did, but Rob Font been in the top 10 for a while now. And, I just feel like he's starting to slide. He's starting to slow down. He's starting to regress. And on top of that, he has a lot of holes in his game at 36 years old. So he's going to be nothing more than a gatekeeper for the top 10 for the next year or two until he eventually actually gets cut from the organization. But that's why he's an honorable mention. I'd like to see him kind of stick around, but also for his own benefit, I'd like to see him cut and sent over to the Bellator bantamweight division. Moving on to my actual list, starting off with my first actual cut, and that is Raoni Barcelos. Raoni Barcelos lost 3 out of his last 4. And most importantly, he's 36 years old as well, and he's in the bantamweight division. And he's not even losing to the elite of the elite like Rob Font. Don't get me wrong, he's losing to okay competition, but Barcelos has clearly lost a step. He lost to Kyler Phillips, and honestly, I thought this fight was close enough. I could have saw the judges giving Barcelos rounds 2 and 3 because Phillips was starting to slow down, but I thought Phillips won this fight. But Barcelos is just slowing down. He lost to Kyler Phillips. The fight before that gets brutally KO'd by Umar Nurmagomedov. Not a horrible loss to have. Before that, got a win over Trevin Jones. Before that, lost to Victor Henry. And Barcelos is now on a 2-fight losing streak. Again, he's lost 4 out of his last 5. You can even put it that way. And he's had a lot of canceled fights for whatever reason over the last couple years. And I just don't know where he really fits into this division. This division is so deep. We don't really need Raoni Barcelos to really be the gatekeeper of maybe the, top 20? Is that what we need? He's taken a significant amount of damage. It's not like he's getting brutally KO'd every fight. He came back and looked all right after a loss to Umar Nurmagomedov. But I think it's time. He's 36 years old in the worst division you could possibly be in at 36 years old in the bantamweight division. The lower the weight class, the harder it is for you to continue to be successful as you get up in age. And for Barcelos, he was never the elite of the elite, even in his prime. He's slowing down. He's taking a lot of damage. And basically, he's just a punching bag for guys who are trying to get into that top 20 of the bantamweight division. So I think it's time for the UFC to cut Raoni Barcelos. Moving up on my list of who needs to be cut, and that is Gavin Tucker. I don't feel right about this at all because Diego Lopez, he lost to Diego Lopez, who was an absolute savage. But Gavin Tucker, when's the last time he won a fight? December of 2020. The last time he won a fight was the first time Davison Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno fought. That's how long it's been. He's been injured. He's been out. And he's 37. He's 37. Now he's lost 2 fights in a row. He lost to Dan Ige, got brutally KO'd in 5 seconds in his last fight. And now he's fighting Diego Lopez, who he knows has amazing BJJ and submission skills. And he's kind of doing okay on the feet. I mean, there wasn't really a whole lot of exchanges on the feet. But he has to know how good Diego Lopez is on the ground with his submission abilities. And he just shoots in on a takedown and basically immediately gets subbed. He immediately finds his way into a triangle / armbar. Almost gets his arm broken. I think he was recovering from a shoulder surgery before this or an arm surgery of some sort before this. And now he's, potentially has an injured arm because Diego Lopez really bent that elbow backwards badly in this submission attempt. And I just think Gavin Tucker, what's he going to do at 145? At 37 years old, what is he going to do? And the fact that, he hasn't been super active. He's on a 2-fight losing streak. I know he has a good win over Billy Quarantillo, but I don't even think that's that good, especially considering it was almost 3 years ago. So I think Gavin Tucker, while it was a short performance, only lasted 1 minute and 38 seconds, I think it's time for the UFC to cut Gavin Tucker. Maybe he can go have success in another organization, but at 37 years old in this division, again, the lower the weight class, the worse it is, as you get up in age. 37's fine at light heavyweight. 37's even okay at middleweight. But you get down to 45, 145 featherweight, it's just not going to be good. And the fight IQ to shoot on Diego Lopez, did he even watch the Movsar Evloev fight? Did he even watch the Movsar Evloev fight? That's what I would like to know. And I don't think he did. I don't think he came in with a smart game plan. He should have looked to strike the entire time. Instead, he looks to grapple and gets brutally armbarred. And who knows if he's going to need some time off with an injured arm now. I don't know what the extent of the injury on that elbow is, but I think it's time for Gavin Tucker to get cut from the UFC. Moving up on my list of who needs to be cut, and that is Alexa Kammerer, loses to Tanner Boser at UFC Nashville, and loses 30-27. And I have a general rule. If you're losing to Tanner Boser 30-27, You do not belong in the UFC. Tanner Boser fought at heavyweight, literally the worst men's division in the UFC, and didn't have success there. Moved down to light heavyweight, lost to Iwan Kutalaba, gets finished by him, and now he fights Alexa Kamur and 30-27s him. And I know it was a competitive fight. I know Kamur had some moments in this fight, but Tanner Boser outstruck him, was able to kind of beat him up in the clinch, was able to fend off takedown attempts. And you look at Alexa Kamur on a 3-fight losing streak. That lost to Tanner Boser, lost to Nikolai Negamoriano, lost to William Knight. Oh my God. If you're losing to William Knight, you do not belong in the UFC. I mean, look at his wins. Justin Ledet. I'm sorry, he's not UFC caliber at all, even for the light heavyweight division, which isn't the best division in the UFC by any means. And I just think, he's on a 3-fight losing streak. He's losing to Tanner Boser. He's only 27 years old, so he could go to another organization, have some success there, and maybe come back to the UFC, because he looks like he could have some potential. He has decent footwork. He's decently athletic, has decent power. But, to get outstruck by Tanner Boser, who's literally so stiff on the feet and isn't really that great anywhere, I think it's time for you to be cut from the organization. Moving on to my next cut and my last cut on the list. And this is kind of a shocking one, a little bit of a shocking one. And that is Jessica Andrade. Jessica Andrade needs to be cut from the UFC. I'm just convinced, she's ranked number 5 in the division, in the flyweight division right now. And she's ranked number 5 in the strawweight division as well. I am convinced that she is just showing up for a check. She's on a 3-fight losing streak. She stepped in on short notice against Tatiana Suarez, gets submitted in the second round, got dominated for the majority of the fight. The last fight before this, she got brutally KO'd by Yan Xiaonan in the first round, just kind of rushing forward, gets clipped and put out. Steps in on short notice against Erin Blanchfield, gets submitted in the second round. And again, 2 out of 3 of these fights, she stepped in on short notice, and they're all against elite competition. But I just think Jessica Andrade is, I don't know, I think she's past her prime. I know she's only 31 years old, and I know we kind of need some depth in the division, but if she's just going to show up to lose each and every fight, what's the point of having her? Because that's generally what I feel now. I feel like she's just showing up to lose a fight and collect the check. I'm not even sure if she's preparing for these fights. I think she's like, I'm just going to go out there and try to throw power shots, and maybe I get a knockout, maybe I don't. It's crazy because she's on a 3-fight losing streak, but she had a win in January. So she's lost 3 fights since January. That's crazy. She lost in February, she lost in May, and now she lost in August. And all 3 of them she's getting finished in. I think Andrade is either fading or she's not taking her career very seriously. And when I'm watching a fighter that I believe has at least a decent skill set, and then every time out, it seems like they're just showing up for a check, I think it's just despicable, honestly. And I understand why. And maybe she's just like, I'll just take whatever short notice fight I can. I'll lose. I'll get choked out in the first or second round, and I collect a decent check. Because my guess is she's a former champion. She's at least getting somewhat of a decent check from the UFC. But that's what it feels like. And I just can't ignore that. And that's why she had to be number 1 on the list, because, to come out there and just basically get dominated in all of her last 3 fights and really change nothing. And has she ever worked on her grappling, honestly? Has she ever worked on her grappling? It seems like every loss she's getting out-grappled. She got out-grappled by Valentina Shevchenko. The Rose Namajunas loss in, I think it was the rematch, I don't think she got out-grappled in that match. She got outstruck in that fight. But, it just seems like her hole in her game for a long time has been her grappling. And even fighting at strawweight, a lot of people were saying, she took fights at flyweight and that's why. I don't think she's taking her career seriously anymore. She's on a 3-fight losing streak. Cut her from the organization. We have decent depth in the women's strawweight division. I don't need to watch Jessica Andrade get beat up 17 times in a row on short notice just so you guys can build contenders in the division, because that's essentially what's going on right now. They have a young contender who's really good. They put her against Jessica Andrade. They let her beat her up in a round, submit her or finish her. And they're like, we got a new contender. She beat Jessica Andrade, who's a former champion. And they pretend like it's a good win, essentially. So Jessica Andrade needs to be cut from the organization. Now, one last fighter I wanted to talk about before I ended this video, and this is not on my cuts list at all. Actually, before I get into that fighter, who is actually going to be cut? Jake Hadley is not going to be cut because only 1-fight losing streak, and also the UK bias. The UFC is trying to build new talent in the UK. Rob Font's not going to be cut. He's going to be used as basically a gatekeeper for the top 10. Ronnie Barcelos, I think, may be cut from the organization. Gavin Tucker, I believe, will be cut from the organization. and Alexa Kamura, I believe, will be cut from the organization. Jessica Andrade, I think she'll stick around. I don't think the UFC will cut her. I think they'll continue to build prospects against Jessica Andrade. Now, moving on to the other fighter I wanted to talk about, and keep in mind, this is not on my cuts list at all. This is Cory Sandhagen. He beat Rob Font in the main event. And the reason I want to talk about Cory Sandhagen is because he's been getting a lot of flack for his performance. And I think a lot of people are kind of sarcastically saying, oh, it should be in the cuts video. So I wanted to talk about him in the cuts video because I feel like I was wrong in my initial reaction to Cory Sandhagen's performance, because he did say he was injured afterwards. He said he was injured in the post-fight. And at the end of the day, if he had an injured elbow, and I noticed it in the fight, I said, you know what? He looks like he's very slow striking on the feet, and he looks very labored on the feet. And if he had an injured elbow, he still fought one of the best guys in the world in the top 10 in Rob Font, and went out there and dominated him for a 50-45. So I think a lot of fans, while I understand the performance was lackluster, I feel like a lot of fans were jumping on Cory Sandhagen's neck and saying, oh, it's a horrible performance. And even myself was saying, oh, this is such a bad performance, and his stock goes down. I feel like it's a little bit of an overreaction. Cory Sandhagen, I understand he's starting to mix the wrestling in, and maybe people find that a little bit more boring. But look at his fights. I mean, the Marlon Vera fight was not boring whatsoever. He mixed in the grappling in that fight. The Song Yadong fight was an incredible matchup. The Piotr Jan fight was my favorite fight of 2021. TJ Dillashaw fight was amazing. The Frankie Edgar fight, brutal KO by Cory Sandhagen. The fight before that, brutal KO against Marlon Moraes. So Cory Sandhagen is due for at least one boring performance. And the fact that he has a legitimate excuse of an injured elbow, I think fans are getting a little bit carried away with the criticism of Cory Sandhagen. He's right there at the top of the division. And, you know, could we say, oh, well, maybe he should have pulled out, but then we wouldn't have had a main event. I mean, we would have got Tatiana Suarez, Jessica Andrade as your main event. Then everyone would have been pissed at Cory Sandhagen as well as Umar Nurmagomedov for ruining UFC Nashville. So I think the criticism is a little bit unfair. I think Cory Sandhagen is in a position to be in a #1 contender fight in his next fight, if not a title fight in his next fight. And I think people are being a little bit too critical of that wrestling-heavy performance, considering he had an injured elbow, or as Joe Rogan would say, that arm was compromised. So I think we need to pump the brakes with the criticism on Cory Sandhagen. That's why I wanted to talk about it in the video. And I think Cory Sandhagen deserves more credit for completely shutting down Rob Font at UFC Nashville and 50-45ing him. Let me know what you guys think about my cuts. Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.